Liliana, good morning. Thank you for joining us for World Rainforest Day for this exciting panel about policy. You're a member of the IUCN committee in the Netherlands since many, many years ago. You're originally from Chile, but you've also been living in the Netherlands, of course, for a long time. I'm super happy to have you here. Can't wait to hear a bit more about the work that you guys do at the IUCN, the work that you do. So I'm gonna leave it over to you so you can do a quick introduction about yourself, the work that you do within the IUCN, and what the IUCN Netherlands Committee works in. That would be a great overview if you can give it to us.
Thank you, Dutch, and thank you so much for having me here. So my name is Liliana Jauregui. As you said, I'm originally from Chile, but I've lived forever in the Netherlands for already, I think, 25 years, of which I have worked for 18 or maybe a bit more for IUCN, the Netherlands. The IUCN it's not complex, but it's a large figure and has different structures. An IUCN Committee of the Netherlands is the platform of the IUCN members in the Netherlands. So, and as such, we operate in different ways. So we are a platform here in the Netherlands for the members, but we are also active in different regions of the world. And in this case, in rainforests, in Latin America, in Africa, and in Southeast Asia, mainly through our projects funded by ministries of foreign affairs, like the Dutch ministry and the Norwegian ministry, for example, and also actually the French government. And we have large programs like the Green Livelihoods Alliance, and another one very, very new. We started this of the end last year, Amazon Rights in Focus, which is also protecting our Amazon region. And me in particular, I'm an expert, a senior expert, environmental justice. So very much involved in governance of protected areas or indigenous territories, and all that is involved in it, which is, for example, land rights issues, women, gender issues, but also illicit economies behind deforestation and all that from the local level, but also in the larger arenas like the policy, European Union policies, etc.
Thank you for that, Liliana. That's a great introduction to understanding a little bit more. Going into our first question, I think you mentioned two important things there. Working with frontline communities is one of them, but also working with policy at an international level. How do you balance this policy action with work on the ground?
A great question, and it's actually a very it's the essence of the conservation work, because conservation work has no basis if you are not well articulated with the ground. For example, for us working with the rightful owners of the territories gives you authority to speak. So evidence has to be produced on the ground. And I don't mean that you're not allowed, for example, to produce scientific information outside the territories, but it has to be validated on the ground. That's important. Also, policy has different levels. So policy is not only produced and developed at the international level. You have policy also at the local level, at the regional level, at the national level. So all these levels are important, and there is also need to be consistent. So you can build policy from, for example, municipality level, and create a protected area at the municipality level, or create a plan to work on fisheries or make use of the forest at the municipality level. And actually those plans are very strong and very solid. But you need also to understand what is the importance of these local protected areas or this local community protected area. So you can connect them, for example, with this CBD, the Convention for Biodiversity, International Convention for Biodiversity. So all those levels need to be connected, and for that is the local level very, very important.
How do you specifically, how do you involve frontline local indigenous communities in the creation of policy action? As we see today, there are a lot of world conferences, world treaties that are created. As you said, not all of them are international, but those who are international very often forget the local context that varies to place, from place to place. So how do we involve these communities as much as we can in creating policy?
There is a word that you're using there, involve, which is sometimes difficult. But what does it mean to involve someone of a group? Many organizations think that involve is just consulting and getting approval. And what does it mean, approval? Organize a workshop and get all the signatures. Well, that's not involve. That is not really meaningful involvement. So when we speak about involvement, we speak about co-designing strategies. We speak about getting the people on board from the very beginning when you're designing a strategy. So that is one side. On the other side, and it's very important in large conventions, we need to create spaces for these groups. So this is a very political, complex arena, but you see the voice or voices that are missing there. And what are the voices that are missing are the local voices. So it's important that organizations like mine, and we're doing it more and more, create spaces and open spaces for these groups also to participate in their own language and with their own information. That's happening more and more. There are international conventions that are inviting these groups more and more. But it's also important for the international organizations to understand that they are not always the protagonists of this. What is happening? We need also to open these platforms for local groups.
Thank you, Liliana. This takes me to, I think we have a perfect example actually here with you as a Latin American living in the Netherlands. The Netherlands being a non-rainforest country, how is it important that these countries, such as the Netherlands, European, North American countries, get involved with policy action for rainforests? How can these countries have an impact for rainforests on the other side of the world?
These countries have a huge responsibility towards rainforest. So not having rainforest, it doesn't mean that you're not responsible for the rainforest in the world. So to give you a very concrete example, the food we eat here, it's responsible for important and large pieces of deforestation in the rainforest of the world. In oil palm, sugarcane, many agri commodities are coming from these regions, and we are eating, and we need all these products. So not everything we eat, but a large part of what we eat here and what we need is originally from there. So important responsibility. And what we can do is try to influence our politicians, but also our consumer behavior towards a more sustainable way of consuming. So check that everything we eat is not importing deforestation from these areas or human rights violations, which is also happening. These areas are a source of conflict, environmental conflicts, what we call environmental conflicts. So the producers are, of course, doing sometimes what they can, but they tend to comply only with the law. So as consumers, but also as organizations working on this side, we can raise the bar higher and push them also to a more sustainable and more, a better policies.
And still at an international level, you've been to many climate conferences, such as COP and Davos and so on. What would you conclude is the real impact that these conferences have on your work? Are there real impacts and conclusive impact coming out of these conferences, in your opinion?
I know what many people like to think, that these are really big egos and big, a lot of paperwork and a lot of words, not really meaning a lot. But the truth is that it is important what's happening also at that level. It's not all, and I think it shouldn't be detached of what's happening on the ground. As I said in the beginning, it has to be, it's not only words what we need, but we need also action. But the truth is that the framework of what is needed, and also a lot of funding, important funding, is coming from these conventions, and it's very important. Now we have the COP, the climate COP, the biodiversity COP, which is one we think it's also important and we should give more attention. But to give you some concrete examples, for example, the COP, the biodiversity COP, is it's gaining more and more attention. We are also showing how the contribution of indigenous peoples and indigenous knowledge is contributing to achieving better targets, and also what we call certain protected areas, which is getting more and more technical, but we are demonstrating the value of indigenous protected areas to achieving all these targets. So, and this will mean in the future to get more acknowledgement, but also more funding is going to go to these areas as well. So it's not answering all the questions, but it's moving big actors to these areas and also getting recognition for the local communities and indigenous group for the work, what they do for the whole world. One more thing I want to say is we have in our region, if we speak about the Amazon, the Escazú new convention, we have the COP1 this year, at the beginning of this year. And it's actually the first of a kind convention. It's a binding treaty, securing, hopefully, that many environmental rights and also the consultation of indigenous people will be guaranteed. It's our own, I mean, speaking of Latin America, it's our own initiative, and it's ratified by 12 countries and signed by other 24. So it's a regional agreement. I'm very hopeful that this will be an important agreement for the indigenous groups, and also the indigenous groups are taking that as, you know, as a very powerful tool for them. And they are, and in this last COP, they were very present, trying to have their own voice recognized. So I'm very hopeful about that agreement too. So just to close, it's not answering all the questions, but we shouldn't be too negative. Instead of neglecting the importance, we should take more the protagonist, be more the protagonist of these actions as local groups.
as you know, in many of these rainforest countries, ensuring and applying and making, repeating myself here, but making sure that policies actually are respected on the ground, that they are enforced, is not always easy in rainforest countries. How do you ensure that these policies and these treaties are respected on the ground?
So again, this is the $1 million question. We just discussed about the international conventions, and so that's one side of the policy. We also discussed about all these levels of policy, and now you're pointing at the side of enforcement. Yes, so to start with, I don't think that developing more laws is a problem. It should be the way. Certainly in countries like in the Latin American region, we can fill a room with all the laws we have. So it's a region with a lot of laws, and the answer of all questions are again new laws. We have countries like Ecuador, Colombia, Bolivia, where we are speaking of nature with rights, very, very new and independent thinking. However, the respect of all those laws are a problem. So enforcement and applying, it's important and should be the way. So it means that you need to understand, you need to translate the laws towards more local applications or local, as you say, jurisdictions. That's a new word. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but I think I'm trying to explain that you need to enforce to the lower level as much as possible. So on the enforcement side, there is a lot to do, but on the other side, also giving rights to the local groups, it's a way to go. Why? Because we speak about areas that are huge and they are sometimes almost empty or with few people. So local groups like indigenous groups, they are the only ones present there. So they need more not only capacities, but also the power to make these laws enforceable. So some border areas, for example, are only under control of indigenous groups. So these groups should get the power or the recognition from the national governments, so that they can also be actors, legal actors on the ground to protect these laws. So I hope this is clear, but it's all these levels. But what I'm trying to say, the way of law development is not necessary all the time. We have enough laws. The way of enforcement is important, and as much as possible, involve these local groups, including indigenous groups, as allies for local governments to enforce these laws.
How do we involve larger audiences? How do we involve the public? How can the public, whether it's one of us here, whether it's someone else listening right now from the other side of the world, how can these people get involved in creating pressure, as you said earlier on, through consumption? Are there any other things that you have thought throughout your career that you've desired, that you've wanted to push for, that you want to invite people to do? Is there anything else?
Yes. So some things we are doing, like getting the stories out, getting strong communicators, trying to connect both worlds. Because for people here living, I'm here in Amsterdam at the moment. Living in Amsterdam is very difficult to imagine how it is to live in the rainforest. So trying to connect these realities is important, and we need strong communicators. And so we're supporting people that are not necessarily, the classical conservationists like biologists or ecologists or environmental lawyers, people with a kind of profiles. We're also supporting people that are writing, making nice documentaries or making pictures to do their work, because we are kind of sometimes too scientific, and people are now have more a need to connect more in a human-like kind of way, that you can rely on the other human on the other side of the world in the rainforest that is struggling with, being a mother, being a father in the rainforest. How will my children survive in this world? How with all this pressure? So that is what we are also trying to do, but I think that is not happening enough yet, and not enough support of private donors, of even governmental donors, is going to that direction. That's on the one side, needs to happen more. And on the other side, what I'm seeing happening, and I like a lot, it's this peer-to-peer connection. So you see youth on this side of the world connecting with youth in the rainforest or in other side of the world, in cities. I think that's an important development. Is happening outside of the conservation community. It's happening in the more movement building kind of collective groups, and I like that a lot. I see that happening. It's I think it's important that more attention is given to that kind of work.
This takes me to my last question. Is there one thing you'd wish for that could happen? Is there one, whether it's policy action, whether it's just something that would have a huge impact in the work that you do with frontline communities in Colombia and Suriname? Is there one thing you'd ask for?
Well, you are asking for one. I will give you more, because it's just not one thing, but it's a long list. So I'm making a selection here, because to
Go
start
ahead.
with, because I started with, we need a responsibility from here, and we need some things happening on territory. So I'll take at least two. So one thing is that we need to take responsibility with deforestation, which is deforestation that we import. We are importing deforestation in these countries. So making use of this moment, at the moment we have the EU deforestation law, which is developed in full development at the European Union. That's setting the bar quite high. So as Europeans, we're saying, and it's not final, it's being developed, but the discussion is we don't want to have products that are importing deforestation. We don't like that. And I know not all the world will do that, but it's an important signal towards the rest of the world, but also towards our internal market. So we need to produce food which is deforestation free and ends deforestation and degradation. So I'm happy with that. So all the information and all that which is going to the lobby at the international level that it's fighting deforestation needs to continue, and raising the bar and pushing other countries on the one side. At the local level, land rights issues need to be resolved. And that means trying to solve all the local conflicts that are happening in the Amazon, in Congo, and Indonesia, which are pushing our local communities and indigenous peoples groups in danger and fighting at the front line. Those two I would like to mention.
Thank you, Liliana. I have so many questions, but I think that's where I'm going to stop today. Thank you for joining us. It was extremely valuable to have you. I hope everyone's enjoyed listening to Liliana and all her expertise that she has to share. Thank you, Liliana.
Thank you, Tasha, for having me.
Hello, we are Green Boots and we are a young Swiss-based NGO which aims at conserving rainforests throughout the world. We think of rainforests as a whole ecosystem to be conserved, including the conservation of biodiversity, combating climate change, and also securing the livelihood of indigenous people. Green Boots is active in 3 areas. First, we support conservation projects on site. So, for example, we support species conservation projects, reforestation projects, or the establishment of new protected rainforest areas. It is important for us that the local community participates in the projects in order to raise awareness, but also to provide them with alternative sources of income and improve their living conditions. At the moment, Green Boots supports projects in Ecuador and Borneo, both involving the local indigenous community. Second, we raise awareness in Switzerland for rainforest conservation, so we inform the Swiss population about the importance of rainforests, but also on the threats to this unique ecosystem. We do this by organizing events, in providing information on our website or on leaflets, and also we show what every person can do personally to conserve rainforests and live a sustainable lifestyle. And third, we work on a political level for rainforest conservation. So, for example, we take position on legislative revisions that may have an impact on rainforests. For example, timber trade regulations, timber declaration, free trade agreements, or import regulations. But we also follow political developments in rainforest countries, and we also follow international negotiations related to climate protection, biodiversity conservation, and forest conservation. So why is it important for non-rainforest countries like Switzerland to contribute to rainforest conservation? So rainforests are important not only for the inhabitants of the rainforests, as a water reservoir, as a pharmacy, climate regulator, and home to countless plant and animal species. The rainforest has an importance that extends far beyond its geographical borders. Switzerland consumes almost 3 times more environmental services and natural resources than are available per person worldwide. This additional consumption is only possible thanks to the import of natural resources and the overuse of global goods. Switzerland imports many goods that come from rainforest countries. For example, Switzerland imports an average of about 300,000 tons of soy per year, and other goods with high deforestation risk are palm oil, coffee, or timber products. Almost 1/4 of Switzerland's footprint is located in countries with high or very high risk of deforestation, of weak governance, of low labor standards. And this is particularly true for coffee, for soy, and palm oil. The demand for these agricultural and forestry commodities drives deforestation and habitat conversion in these countries of origin. And it contributes to biodiversity loss, to greenhouse gas emissions, and human rights abuses. By consuming these goods, we accept these negative effects. And by overexploiting these goods, we live at the expense of future generations and other parts of the world. So Switzerland therefore bears a great responsibility. It must have an influence on how these goods are produced. And Switzerland can play an important role in promoting sustainable production, procurement, and consumption of commodities with deforestation risks. So global deforestation and biodiversity loss continue at an alarming rate. If Switzerland does not take full responsibility for its deforestation footprint and its associated risks, it will jeopardize its credibility and its long-term security of supply of important raw materials. However, Swiss politics hardly addresses the issues of tropical forests and their importance for biodiversity, climate change, and indigenous people. Although Switzerland, with its high resource consumption, has a great influence on the conservation of rainforests, it has reduced its direct commitment to the protection of rainforests in recent years. But the conservation of rainforests worldwide requires not only concrete measures in rainforest countries, but also efforts by industrialized countries and also global cooperation. So how can non-rainforest countries like Switzerland contribute to rainforest protection? So Switzerland is a very small country. If it adopts more environmental friendly import regulations or stricter environmental regulations for international companies from the extractive sector, for example, it can above all take a pioneering role and encourage other non-rainforest countries to adopt these regulations as well. However, the import volumes of Switzerland are very small compared to European countries, and therefore the impact on the global market is very limited. However, Switzerland has a very good reputation, especially when it comes to international negotiations. So Switzerland can contribute to rainforest conservation within these negotiation frameworks, for example, when it comes to the Convention on Biological Diversity or to the Climate Convention. In particular, Switzerland needs to establish cooperations with related organizations, with coalitions and parties to have an even greater impact. And of course, Switzerland must fully implement the international agreements that it has ratified. Yeah, for years now, attempts have been made to adopt a binding international agreement on forest protection. Currently, however, there are only non-binding agreements, but this international agreement would be a great way to get all countries to agree on generally binding rules for forest protection. In addition, Switzerland can support rainforest protection projects on site directly with funding and knowledge transfer, and also raise awareness here in Switzerland. So Green Boots calls on Switzerland to develop a tropical forest strategy, and Switzerland should take an active role and declare the protection of rainforests as a foreign policy goal. Switzerland must take a pioneering role in the areas of sustainable economy, sustainable investments, as well as in sustainable trade and imports. And this requires, among other things, financial investments and transparency in trade chains of important goods, but also the enforcement of high environmental and social standards in all future trade agreements. Switzerland also needs to introduce binding due diligence laws that require companies to demonstrate that their products that they sell here in Switzerland do not drive global deforestation and violate human rights. And Switzerland also needs to improve the information on the environmental impacts of the goods that it sells, and Switzerland needs to promote projects and investments to improve sustainability in high-risk production areas.
Hello, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share a few words with you within this event. My name is Büsser. I'm the head of the Amazon campaign at the Society for Certain Peoples Switzerland. The Society for Certain Peoples, STP, is an independent voice for the cause of minorities and indigenous peoples. We support local efforts to strengthen the human rights of minorities and indigenous peoples, and work both nationally and internationally with organizations and individuals who pursue a similar goal. Our work focuses on indigenous communities in the Arctic, the Brazilian Amazon, and minorities such as the Uyghurs in Switzerland. We document human rights violations through research, raise public awareness, represent the interests of affected communities to authorities and policymakers. In doing so, we closely work with our indigenous partner and support their fight for self-determination and recognition of their rights. Now, how do we as an NGO based in a non-forest country contribute to the protection of the Amazon? What can be our role? We are strongly convinced that indigenous communities play a crucial role as forest defenders. Thus, strengthening the rights of indigenous communities and protecting the unique biome Amazon goes hand in hand for society for certain peoples. At the same time, Switzerland, where STP is based, plays a crucial role in global economy. Think, for example, of the financial or the global sector. Thus, our Amazon campaign, Hands Off the Amazon, combines these two approaches by supporting people on the ground on the one hand and policy work in Switzerland on the other. How exactly does this go together now? Let's take the example of gold. Switzerland is one of the most important gold hubs globally. At the same time, illegal gold mining is one of the biggest drivers to Amazon destruction, as you probably know. So SDP has been working on improving the Swiss gold industry for many years. Recently, together with a delegation of Brazilian indigenous and traditional peoples and representatives from the Swiss gold sector, we worked out a public statement. The statement sends a clear signal to the Brazilian government and also the global gold sector that the destruction of the Amazon for mining is criticized by industry itself. So this policy work does have an impact on the situation on the ground. Another example for policy action in Switzerland is our engagement to make Swiss gold sector more transparent. Some years ago, we requested insight on suppliers of the largest Swiss refineries. Our request was rejected, and now, after having submitted an appeal, we are waiting for the decision of the federal court. The issue of transparency is crucial in order to minimize illegal dirty gold entering Switzerland. On the ground in Brazil, STP, by providing funds, significantly contributes to enabling a solution-oriented project run by our partner ISA, and this project fights illegal gold mining. Yanomami and the Aquana communities are empowered to become cocoa producers and thus get alternative income to illegal gold mining. We are convinced that Switzerland, as the world's biggest gold hub, must lead by example. Hopefully, policy work and policy changes in the world's biggest gold hub on the long term have an impact on gold sourcing in the Amazon. Another way to contribute to policy shifts on the long term is by regularly using UN mechanisms to draw attention to the massive destruction of the Amazon and the violation of indigenous communities, be it in the context of the joint appearance at the expert mechanisms on the rights of indigenous peoples, mediation between special rapporteurs, or meetings between special rapporteurs and representatives of the communities, providing documentation to the UN bodies, or making a submission to the Universal Periodic Review of Brazil, as we just did. Through this lobbying and advocacy work at the UN, we as a non-rainforest country, or as an NGO based in a non-rainforest country, can work towards policy shifts on an international scale, or in Switzerland or in states such as Brazil. Finally, we would like to revisit the question of how we work with local partners, especially indigenous communities in Brazil. They are probably our most important partner in protecting the Amazon. For example, we finance a project in the Tapajós region that aims at empowering indigenous leaders politically and juridically. Through workshops, they obtain political knowledge and get to know how to use national and international law in order to claim their rights. This expertise is crucial when it comes to protecting their territories and rights. Speaking of land rights, the importance of self-demarcation processes must be mentioned. For several years now, SDP has repeatedly been supporting self-demarcation efforts of Munduruku and Tupinamba communities in Para. The protection and preservation of the Amazon and all rainforests is fundamental to humankind. As an NGO based in a non-rainforest country, the interplay of empowering and strengthening indigenous communities as forest defenders and pushing towards policy reforms in Switzerland and internationally is the strategy we have chosen to make a contribution to preserve the Amazon. Thank you.